The summit of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations has kicked off in Cambodia. The three-day summit in the capital city will also include the East Asia Summit. This time, the 10-nation bloc faces a multitude of issues, including the escalating crisis in Myanmar, with increasingly frustrated members of the group struggling to get the country's military to comply with an agreed peace plan. Several ASEAN members have blamed Myanmar's military rulers for failing to implement a peace plan, which was jointly agreed upon last year. The junta has meanwhile blamed a lack of progress on the pandemic and obstruction from armed resistance movements that it calls terrorists. Apart from this, the heightened rivalry between the US and China and the disputes in the South China Sea will also find their mention in the talks. At the opening ceremony of the ASEAN summit, the Cambodian Prime Minister, who is the current bloc chair, said that the regional grouping is at its most certain juncture as of now. World leaders from across Asia and beyond, including the US President Joe Biden and the Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, the South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are expected to participate in the various regional forums. Global leaders will discuss ways to enhance bilateral cooperation and economic partnership. The string of summits and bilateral sideline meetings also mark the start of a rare flurry of high-profile conferences across the region this month. Indonesia will host the Group of 20 summit in Bali next week, followed by the Asia Economic Cooperation meeting in Bangkok. Now, for more updates, we are now being joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, who is in the middle of all the action in Bali. Siddhant, thanks for joining us. Let's talk about the US and China tensions, which will, of course, be a prime focus at this summit. Tell us more on that front. What can we expect?
Well, the meeting happens on Monday, as we all know, and there has been an extensive release by White House, but a significant meeting coming in the backdrop of the Taiwan Strait crisis. What both leaders are going to say is something that will define the course of the relationship for next few years. We know that there has been a lot of back and forth between the two countries, especially after Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan that had irked Beijing, and of course, we saw a lot of aggressive actions by the Chinese as well, eventually leading up to a kind of a military blockade of the self-governed territory. We saw something which concerned the countries in the region. So when it comes to this meeting, this in-person meeting might provide that glimmer of hope, and the fact that both sides have agreed to meet in person here in Bali is something which is very significant. We saw the Chinese President Xi Jinping meeting the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Samarkand. That meeting was also significant in terms of the optics by the Chinese. What optics the Chinese will put across this time is something that will, of course, make the international headlines.
Right. Of course, let's talk about Myanmar now and the crisis there. That is another focus. In fact, there's been an ultimatum of sorts to Myanmar to get its act together, work towards peace, else it will be barred from the forum. Tell us more about that.
Well, it is a season of summits here in Asia. As you listed the number of summits we are going to have in this part of the world. But when it comes to Myanmar, that will be a concern, whether it's the ASEAN meetings. In fact, today started a series of ASEAN meetings and summit that will continue till Sunday. And of course, G20 is also expected to talk about this issue. But if we talk about ASEAN, they, of course, are particularly concerned, given that Myanmar is part of the grouping, and we know that in the past as well, ASEAN grouping has been putting the ultimatum. The 5-point initiative by the ASEAN is something that has been welcomed by the countries in the region. In fact, just 2 days ago, the Indian Foreign Ministry also welcomed and said that Myanmar should follow and implement the 5-point agenda given out by ASEAN. But it looks like that the ASEAN grouping, it does not feel very hopeful when it comes to engaging with Myanmar. While ultimatums have been given, there are, of course, questions that will Myanmar take ASEAN seriously or not, especially the junta which took power after that unfortunate coup.
Right, Siddhant, thanks so much for all those updates. We'll, of course, come back to you for more once things get underway. WION World is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.